And hello again, dear ones. Rev BRZ over here.
Rev Z right here.
And this is New Thought Today. Comes to you live on the New Thought Media Network every Tuesday at 2 p.m. Mountain Time, and available on both our YouTube and Facebook video archive channels. So please check it out, the archives. Feel free to go back and check out the old episodes of this, as we have Rev Z and I have been having going on a few months now of conversation around some of the guiding principles, statements, and the evolution of those within religious science, science of mind, New Thought, and the Centers for Spiritual Living. So last week we started talking about the original, probably one of the original, if you will, culminations of statements that Ernest Holmes came out with, and that was called What We Believe. And so let's do a quick little recap. Last week, we looked at these statements. We believe in God, the living spirit almighty, one indestructible, absolute, and self-existent cause, that this one manifests itself in and through all creation, but is not absorbed by its creation. The manifest universe is the body of God. It is the logical and necessary outcome of the infinite self-knowingness of God. And we believe in the incarnation of spirit in everyone, and that all people are incarnations of this one spirit. And again, if you'd like to learn more about what we had to say about all that, well, then the replay is available back in last week's episode. Because today, what we want to launch into is, now we may not cover all three of these points today, but if we do, hey, great. And if we need more time, we'll take it next week. But we're going to kick it off today with we believe in the eternality, the immortality, and the continuity of the individual soul forever and ever expanding. That's a mouthful, Z.
Yes, that is. And, it is the logical conclusion of what we talked about the last episode, because we talked about, in essence, that God, the divine, all of the many different names that we choose to use to identify the thing itself, is that this thing itself is a energy or a spirit or a law, if you will, that contains all things, that has no beginning and has no end, which speaks to the eternality of it. And the immortality of it is that it will go on forever and ever and ever. And so when we think about life being eternal and that it is immortal, now we begin to look at this concept of there is something that mirrors very closely Einstein's definition of energy. I think it was Einstein who said, energy never changes, it just changes form.
Right.
And so that's what we're dealing with when we deal with the immortality and the eternality of something, is that it just keeps transforming and becoming something new or becoming something slightly different than it was before. But in essence, it's the same thing.
Yeah.
And so it can get very circular, as we found in some of our other programs, that something that has no beginning and has no end, that is eternal and immortal, it just keeps moving. And so at some point, is the best way I like to explain it, is a spiral that has 360 degrees. And every time we go through the spiral, we're up or down, depending on what's going on. You're at 0 point, but you're at a different perspective. So the vibration feels good, the same, the energy feels the same, but it's slightly above or below the starting point. And so it becomes very circular, if that answers the question, so to speak.
Exactly. And folks, we're ministers. We've been doing this for a lot of years now. We could go around and around and around and around and share with you how these different aspects show up in different parts of culture, in different parts of our history, and in different parts of our own life and our own personal evolution. And for me, that's a big part of this one, is that our own individual soul. So I think we all understand and we all get it that the human body is just that. It's a vehicle, it's a vessel, and the day will come when we all cast aside the body and move into a greater dimension, as one of our mentors says, that greater dimensions of livingness.
Yes.
And that will be an expansion of our consciousness from where we are now. However, that doesn't mean that we have to wait until the next thing to expand our consciousness. It does not mean we are locked into a pattern of thinking that we hold today or yesterday. We are forever and ever expanding. Our soul is forever expanding outward. And I love the spiral, right, Z, because it keeps us coming around. And we find ourselves going, wait a minute, wasn't I here like 3 years ago? Or when was the last time I was at this place? Okay, let's go back in my journals. Let's go back in my own history and say, yeah, here's where I was in form. Here's where I was in a physical parallel to where I am today. And where was I in consciousness the last time around?
Yeah. And you said something there that was key, because oftentimes I hear people say, it's a matter of life and death. But in reality, it's a matter of birth and death, because life is the culmination of those two things, or is the inclusiveness of life, of birth and death. That is the process of life. And so when we begin to look at this principle at the level of the eternal life and immortal life, the thing of life itself is a continuum. But inside of that container, there are these moment by moment births and deaths and births and deaths. So if we can't expand our consciousness beyond that concept, then these, more so the deaths, seems to be this final thing, seems to be this looming things that we fear and so forth. Whereas in reality, if we take that as a part of life, we know that right after that, there's another rebirth into another level of something.
Yeah, exactly. As we're listening, I'm reminded of two things. Number one, this is absolutely, this conversation, this principle, the idea of immortality, the eternality of the soul. This is that place of faith. And the Science of Mind and Spirit is built on the concept. In fact, the textbook opens with language that talks to that we are all looking for that place where science and spirituality meet. This is by far the side of spirituality. This is the faith side. This is that side that says, I do not know, but my humanness can't possibly know what's beyond, because we are locked into the physical sensations and perception, to a degree locked in. Now, many have been able to move beyond that and transcend that. And I think we only need to look as far as the popularity of channeled entities, channeled intelligences, to recognize that there is something. If you've ever read an Abraham Hicks book, or listened to Esther Hicks speak, or read a Seth book, or any of the other channels, A Course in Miracle, A Course in Love, there is this experience of saying, this is a knowledge above just the human realm. And yet it's being transmitted through human means. That to me is more than enough proof that there's something going on. And this statement by Holmes, again, let's look at it real quick, right? The eternality, the immortality, and the continuity, meaning it's always, that soul is always the same. So my soul is taken on this body for this epoch, and I trust, I'm in deep faith that whatever comes next is a different loop on the spiral.
And you, no, go ahead.
I was just going to invite the audience. What do you think, folks? Chime in. If you're with us live, We'll try to answer your comments or respond to your comments. If you're watching this at a later time on a replay, we'll still chime in and find that comment. We'll be notified and respond to you. But we'd love to hear part of what you think about all of this, as far as the eternality, immortality, and continuity of the soul. Right. See, I cut you off. Go ahead.
Well, no. You brought something to mind that I'm thinking that probably most people have heard of the term indigo kids, which came out in the early 2000s. It came more prominent, and one of the things with some of the indigo kids were these remembrance of past lives that they talked to these kids about, or the kid, somehow went to some place or saw something and said, "Ooh, I remember this and that and the other." Yeah. And quite frankly, that is the exact way that they actually choose who the next Dalai Lama is. They put a few things in front of the kid at a very early age, and then the kid who picks up the item that belonged to the prior, the prior Dalai Lama, and can explain what it is, they say, okay, this is the next one. Again, because there's that spiritual connection. I like to say it this way. There's the oneness that expresses itself. The oneness itself has a continuity that expresses itself through us in a continuous way, in a perfect union. Our container is just not there to hold all of it. But that's when we get the inspirations. When we get in alignment and we open up, we get these inspirations and these premonitions and these things that allow us at that moment to see more. Boom. We have just stepped, a great line there would be, we just stepped into the twilight zone. But I couldn't resist. But we've really just stepped into the allness of God at that moment, because it is a twilight. It is that moment where everything that has happened or you see happening has went contrast. Boom. And you see it all. No volume.
There, how about that? Hit the wrong button. So, yes, we did step into the twilight zone, but that's not here what we're here to talk about today. We'll talk about that on another show, maybe Friday. But it is that place where we have countless experiences and anecdotal experiences, and anyone that's ever had a near-death experience is absolutely knows what we're talking about here. There is, and so many of us, we call it a mystical moment, or we call it an out-of-body experience, or a near-death experience. And it is in many ways that experience of peeking behind the veil. Mm-hmm. And as you were sharing, I was reminded of a great talk that our founder, Dr. Ernest Holmes, gave at the Whittier Church many years ago now, where he has that moment on stage and he's describing it, and he's in that state of absolute awe at how thin the veil really is between this side and what's beyond. And he was able to catch a glimpse of that. And again, I know that is real for so many, that we catch that glimpse of that. And it feels to me like there comes a point where our humanness is so in tune, so in line. And I trust this is what it's going to be for me, right? That my humanness is so in tune, so in line, that it's just like, I'm going to go over there for a while. And I just never sort of come back to this side. Mm-hmm. And we can look.
That's key. That's key, because I'm doing some work for a talk I'm giving, and it talks about from the side of my textbook in the how do we use this thing called God, or this thing itself. And it speaks very specifically in the fact that it says, one way to think of it is that we are immersed, and we've heard those stories about the fish being in the ocean and trying to determine it's that kind of analogy that we think about, or should begin to think about, when we look about this immortality and internality of life, because the fish is immersed in life. It is in him, through him, around him, consuming him, and is actually what it is made of. But when we are not in alignment with it, or we only looking at it from various perspectives, we lose that continuity of it.
Yeah. There's this great example happening in the world right now, actually, as we even speak, a great example of all this. Now, many people may know the story of Yogananda and his transitioning, and that same experience is happening right now for the Vietnamese monk, Buddhist monk, popularly known as Thich Nhat Hanh, known to his friends and family as Thay. Thay, and late last year he went into meditation, and he's not expected to return, and his body is still there, and his body is being cared for. And this is the exact, and we saw this same experience when Yogananda left, and the body remained stable and cared for, and the consciousness went to play somewhere else. So we are seeing that place, I believe, where we can point to our faith, but we can also point to the real life examples of it.
Right.
And that is reassuring.
Yeah. And when you think about it, before we went on air, I was sharing with Robert, I just came back from officiating close friend, family member, like a brother, funeral service. And, knowing we had this and looking at a body that's there and that only a few days ago was animated and laughing and so forth. And then now there's just a vessel, but that source, if you will, that entity that was there in that container is no longer there. And so there's that, as you were saying, I was thinking about it, there's that thin veil between what's in the container that's animating it and where did it go when it's no longer animated.
Right.
Is it like fog? Did it dissipate? Or, and even the fog, it dissipates from being seen, but the molecules just get smaller and evaporate back up into the sky, if you will. And so, that's why we commonly hear when we had funerals or services of that sort, memorials, that the soul has gone back to the source. Well, in the same idea of rain and clouds or fog dissipating, it's that I like to look at it in that same analogy, is that it was constituted in this container, and now that container is no longer there, it has broken down to a thin layer of consciousness that has emerged back with the global consciousness, only to condense again and come back down as rain, or come back down as the continuity of that consciousness that was here before, that is now somewhere else.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, great way to put it, Z. Thank you. Right? Yes. And that is the beauty of it, is to know that no matter what's going on in this world, this is temporary. This too shall pass. And to me, it's kind of like, we wouldn't be here having these experiences if it didn't benefit the soul's evolution, the soul's growth. We wouldn't be having these experiences. So for us to be here and for there to be nothing after this, for there to be a big delete button and file deleted, bye-bye, gone, it's like, well, yeah, when we know even in the computer world, nothing's ever really fully gone. It's lived somewhere, somehow, probably on a server in the Utah desert somewhere. But we get to that point where, okay, this doesn't serve anymore. There was value here, And now I'm going to take what I've learned. I'm going to take that value that's been created. I'm going to take the experience of it, and I'm going to move into the next dimension, the next experience. And, it's really cool because you can, when we explore these concepts, folks, you can follow Holmes's train of thought here, because right as he's speaking about, and again, to the best of our awareness, knowledge, and belief, these are an answer to a letter. The statements we're sharing are an answer that Ernest sat down and wrote out in response to a letter that he received in the office in LA one day. And so immediately following this statement, he shares with us that we believe that heaven is within us and that we experienced it to the degree that we become conscious of it. That connection. So yeah, our consciousness is growing and expanding, and at some point we become conscious that heaven is not on the other side of the veil, that we can have heaven on this side of the veil.
Yes, and I want to digress for a second, because I see Linda had a question that I think kind of ties into both things, and she had this question of about dementia and Alzheimer's, and about the other side. There's a good study, and I will find the psychiatrist who did the work at University up in Boston at a psychiatric center, where he was doing study on people with dementia and talking and hearing things. And what he was studying was the fact that because we are electrochemical beings while we're in this body, that spirit is animated and displayed through that medium, that his supposition was that often, if not most of the time, they were hearing and seeing things because the electromagnetic and the electrochemical processing centers of the brain had changed. And they could see differently, like snakes see infrared and bats see ultraviolet. So that same kind of thing happened, and they were actually hearing and seeing things that the normal perception of the brain could not see. And so if you take that kind of approach and then flip over and look at this heaven, as much as you can conceive or become conscious of it, and we hear people who go into meditation or have out-of-body experiences speak of these types of experiences, I would submit that, yes, we know that in a meditative state that, or in an out-of-body state, chemistry of the body change, electromagnetics of the body change, which means the consciousness of the body has also changed.
Yeah.
And so that we begin to see this place as heaven or hell, if you will, based on the conscious alignment of how we attune to the one thing. Because one last thing you were saying is, again, it's the fish in the water. And the moment that fish becomes attuned and knowledgeable of, oh yes, I am in the water, it does a flick of a tail and it is like 200 yards away with no effort at all.
Right. I'm reminded of a film, and I don't know the name of it, folks. Some of you may have seen it. And it's a biography piece of Jimi Hendrix. And in this film, there's a couple of his longtime friends. And they're recounting the story of some of the acid trips they had all been on together. And how they were they were setting intentions on how they would alter their consciousness through the use of drugs to reach euphoric states, and were seeking heaven, if you will. And there was always something that struck me in this interview. There's the one guy, and he almost lets it's like it slips out. He doesn't even intend to share this. But what he says is his philosophy, his thought, his theory is that Jimmy got up to that door in a trip, got to a point where he knew he could go beyond. And this guy said he had such an ego that said, I'm Jimi Hendrix, I can go there and come back. and he went there. But we all know he didn't come back. There is anecdotal. So yes, Linda, right? I believe anyone has the ability to walk up to that edge at any time in our lives when we become conscious that's available to us. I don't plan to do it till I'm like 130, at least not willingly. Now there might be a different plan for me, but yeah, but I'm not going into predestination. So, so let's just look at that. So where we've gotten to, right, folks? If you're just joining us, this is New Thoughts a Day. We've been talking about the What We Believe statements as written by Dr. Ernest Holmes way back when, and we've been talking about it, eternality and immortality. Here we are saying we believe that heaven is within us and that we experience it to the degree that we become conscious of it. And, see, what you were just sharing is, I think, very right. We can create hell for ourselves just as easily as we can create heaven.
I mean, it's, because it's that, I like to put it in the simple terms. This hammer that I'm holding in my hand will look like a screwdriver if I don't use it to be a hammer. If I'm trying to, it is until we become conscious of, yes, I can hammer a screw with the nail, with the hammer, but the results are going to be very different than if I got a straight nail or a screw. Right. And so when we begin, and so that's until we become conscious of the relationship between hammer and nail and hammer and screw, you could kind of say that's like a heaven and hell and trying to build a building. Right. I need to screw the screws and hammer the nails, or else my building may not be as supported as I think it is.
Yes. Exactly. Folks, I don't know if we've got, there's sort of that behind the scenes underground running pool of when Z is going to run out of good old American colloquialisms to share with us. I don't think we're going to plumb the bottom of that vessel for a long, long time. There is a reservoir there that just keeps coming through. So, and see, so here's my thing in this one, right? Okay, so I can become conscious that it's up to me to create heaven. But then I got to be able to practice it. And I've got to create for myself. And this has been my journey. I've had to create for myself an environment where I am consistently reminded of these truths. Yep. That if it is to be, it's up to me. And I know that so many of these things sound trite and, and new age mumbo jumbo and woo woo. Believe me, we've heard every version of every description you can throw at us. And at the end of the day, I still have to surround myself with those reminders. So when things hit, when things like last Wednesday happen, and suddenly your email blows up and your social media feeds start dinging off the hook, and you already know something's going on before you even get to the machine. I can't tell you how many ministers have told me in the past week that they just sensed something had happened, but they didn't know what it was. And then within a short amount of time, minutes, hours, a couple hours, they were made aware that something had happened at the Capitol and went and investigated what it was and then went to prayer. Mm-hmm. So we have that ability to tap into this. We become conscious that we create our heaven, but what am I doing to actually make that happen? Or am I just sitting around waiting for somebody to throw a gold brick in my lap?
Yeah. As you're saying that, some of you may remember this. It was considered a toy called Silly Putty. And with Silly Putty, you could make it into a ball and it would bounce, and you could make it into different shapes. You could even flatten it and stretch it and press it down on a comic they used to have the colored comics in the newspaper, all the brilliant colors, and you could press your silly putty there and it would capture the whole cartoon on the silly putty. Well, imagine that silly putty is you or me. And whatever is impressed upon it, whatever outside force, if you will, or shaping conditions will cause it to react to that. And so when we're looking at these ideas of expanded consciousness and heaven and hell and how things are put in the container that they are, I look at it as an impressing upon, right? And so whatever I impress or allow myself to be pressed up against to impress upon me, i.e. the comic strip in the newspaper, then I become that thing and begin to act from that platform. So in the idea of heaven and hell, if I only look at horrible news or I only look at good news, it goes both ways. I become lopsided in my consciousness because I'm not allowing for the full expression. It's like the whole idea we were talking about life and death. Well, it's not life and death, it's birth and death. And if I start messing around with that, I forget about the birth part, that every moment there's a rebirth. Every moment there's a rebirth to joy, to life, to love itself. And that's where we begin to understand this heaven and hell thing and how we navigate it, I think.
Yes. I will say I'm pretty sure silly putty still exists.
Oh, does it?
I'm pretty
I may
sure
have to order some now.
I'm pretty sure you can still get silly putty. I know you can still get the Sunday comics, but they're not the same. So, not from when we were growing up, that's for sure. And right, we don't need to look any further than our social media feeds to see this played out, to see exactly what Rev Z is talking about here. Because right now, from my perspective, that's something that is being raised up in Americans' consciousness to heal. We fall way too easily into our own bias bubbles, and I can give you a dozen names right now off of my feed who will only listen to one or two avenues of thought, and anything else is absolutely nope, that's evil, that's wrong, that's that. And I watch friends who do live in the same paradigm but from the opposite perspective, and they look at anything that comes down the line that isn't liberal, isn't from the left, as evil and wrong. And I get it. It's tough to be in a place where we can take in the both and. I have my personal opinions. I search out some of this stuff, and it's not always easy to find. Some of these guys hide their stuff, and I find it, and I try to listen to it, and I try to listen to it with an open mind to say, okay, there is a portion of God's great gift on this planet that believes this, that believes, and not to get into the particulars, right, but believes in a markedly different way than I do. And that doesn't make them any less God. They are still a divine expression of the one. And I believe that I have to be conscious of both sides so I can find the truth, so I can find the balance, now it doesn't mean that I let myself be a doormat, and it doesn't mean that I promote things when I believe they're being misled or misrepresented. But I cannot just vilify every piece that doesn't immediately fall into alignment with what I think is true.
Well, and you brought up 2 points, and I want to write them down because I didn't want to miss them. When we talk about expanded consciousness, we know we live in a world of a dual world, not duality, but a dual world, or dualism, not duality. Right. And so we have this thing where, there's no up without down. There's no left without right, because without the opposite end or the dual part of that thing has no meaning whatsoever. If you didn't know what up was, if I came to you and said down, you'd look at me like, what is he talking about? And so if we get stuck in looking at any one of those things, we have constricted our consciousness. But when we talk about here, this expanding consciousness forever and ever, when I begin to expand my consciousness, now I become aware of up. So down has a little more meaning, and I don't start having my environment, my whole reference point made from the fact that I'm thinking is down, right? We can think back to the whole paradigm that happened when people thought the earth was flat. There was a whole way of living when you thought the world was flat, or when they thought the world was flat. Now, when they had an expanded conscious and figured out, well, it's not flat, it's round, a whole new world opened up to them. A whole new way of being, existing, speaking, everything changed. And so that's what we are looking at in this particular case when we talk about consciousness expanding forever and ever in an immortality way that allows us to experience heaven and hell to the degree that we can align ourselves with that consciousness. And that's what the whole game is about right there.
So you open up another great can of worms. Because I love it. I love this stuff, folks, right? So the earth was flat until we had the earth was flat, or so we believed, and that was our faith. Until science came along and said, no, wait a minute, it's round. So for the most part, everybody said, okay, it's round. However, there was always still a small belief pattern, and we know this is true because this belief is still alive and active right now. The belief that the earth was flat never truly went away. It's still with us, and there's still plenty of people that believe that way. And what we're saying is we've got to be okay with that. That is the both and, because I cannot negate their faith. Only they can wake up to a different reality and a different set of a different belief pattern. And what I have learned over my career in this philosophy is the more somebody tells me I'm wrong, the more I'm committed to holding my ground, believing what I believe, and saying, no, you're the one that's wrong. Let me prove to you what's going on. Now that to me is discord. That is not creating heaven on earth.
Yes. And that speaks to that whole quote that's attributed to Einstein that says a problem cannot be solved at the level that it was created.
Right.
And so whenever we find ourselves in this sticky wicket position, no matter how it shows up, whether it's relationships or job or whatever it might be, we are at a point where we've created a problem in consciousness that somehow may metastasize in our body and our relationships or differently. And when we can raise our consciousness above that point and begin to see the two things that are in polarity, if you will, and figure out what the balancing point is, what the point where they can easily be maintained, we rise above it and we find a new way of living or a new way of expressing. And that's what we're here for, an immortality and for an eternality, bar none.
Yes. Okay. So folks, right, here we go. Cause this now we're straying into the realm of our third statement for the day. We believe the ultimate goal of life is to be a complete emancipation from all discord of every nature, and that this goal is sure to be attained by all. Now, I don't really know anybody that'll tell you they have never experienced any sense of discord, suffering, all of that in their lives. I believe everybody's had something, unless you're too young to truly understand this conversation, in which case, get away from the computer, tell mom or dad to turn it off. But ultimately, we have all experienced some amount of discord somewhere. And now, again, that is up to us. That is on our end. Sorry, let's do it there. Yes. And we take personal responsibility for that. However, what we believe is that we are all moving into a place where we are free of those discords. We're going to have to do it ourselves. We can use friends and guides and mentors and coaches and spiritual practitioners and ministers to help us get there. But ultimately, it's up to us to free ourselves of that sense of discord. However, the promise is the goal is sure to be attained by all.
Right. And you know, there's this process that I like to go through to help me get beyond that, if you will, where as Ernest says, there is the thing itself, the all in all. There's everything in there. And within that everythingness, there's a correspondence, i.e., we call it left and right, up and down. We give it some not so nice names, good and bad, right? But so those are correspondence to the one thing itself. And the moment we step into that correspondence, there's automatically a polarity between them, which creates a rhythm and a vibration or frequency, however you want to do, because now we have to try to keep those in consciousness and understand how they work in tandem. And when we do that, we step into this whole idea of cause and effect. If I swing the thing to the left on the pendulum and I let it go, it's going to swing equally back to the right. And so now we have the every action is an opposite and equal reaction, right? But until we understand the whole nature of the thing itself, the movement of it, the correspondence of it, the vibration and rhythm of it, then we can begin, I think, to rise above, to see it at another level, and begin to incorporate it in everything we do. So I now look at a thing and I don't see the same discord, because I know if I swing it to the left, the same energy and force that put it to the left is going to cause it to go right back to the right. And there's going to be, and if I can measure it, there's going to be a distinct rhythm and there's going to be a distinct vibration that goes along with that goes tandem with the rhythm. So when we can live life in that way, we can lessen some of that discord.
Yes.
And ultimately free ourselves.
Mm-hmm. And right. And there we are, folks, creating heaven on earth.
Yes.
Letting go. And sometimes it starts with the simplest things. Letting go of the little discords in our lives, the little things, the little annoyances. And it doesn't have to be the end all and be all. It's not like we have to sit down and make this our life's project. And today I'm going to create heaven on earth. No, I'm going to over this lifetime. Now, I fully believe the quicker we wake up to these truths, then the sooner we can have these experiences. I personally didn't find the science of mind until about 20 years ago. When I did, would I have liked to have found it 30, 40 years ago? Sure. And I had to move through the experiences, had to be with what was going on in my life to get to a point where I could say, hey, all this kind of makes sense. So we want you to know, if there's a point where you're saying, hey, I don't understand, how in the world what are you guys talking about? That's the point to reach out to one of us, to another practitioner. Let us know in the comments. Send an email, info@ntmedia.org, and let us know where you'd like more information, where you'd like more support, where you'd like to explore these ideas more, and what you'd like to hear us exploring on this program. Because we intend to be here every Tuesday this entire year. We intend to be here having these conversations and looking at these statements, because truly it took me more than a few years to kind of really get to the point of what is complete emancipation. To me, that means I don't wake up with the thought. If I wake up with the thought of snugga, I got to go. Well, that's not complete emancipation. If I allow myself to be frustrated or I allow myself to blow up or get angry because of something that of a condition, that's not complete emancipation. And in many ways, that points to where my work is. Yes.
and you just made me think about something. I was looking it up. I have to go look it up now even more. When you're talking about Jimi Hendrix had this song called "Are You Experienced?" or "Have You Ever Been Experienced?" Which to me speaks to that, that part of getting into and aligning with life. There's a verse in there that says, "We'll hold hands and watch the sunrise from the bottom of the sea." It's that being able to immerse yourself in a thing, because, just think about it. How many people last night watched the football game, Alabama and Ohio State, and got fired up about one team or the other? And just think about the environment and the consciousness that was created for that moment that people were in. They were either angry or happy or sad or vengeful, all by just focusing their mind and attention to one thing. Yeah. Well, that same thing happens in our everyday life. So if we're having discord, a lot of it, I know for me, I only speak for myself, a lot of my discord comes from focusing on a thing over and over and over again for whatever reason. Or my joy comes the same way. But after some time, either the joy or the vengefulness or whatever discord, whatever it might be, becomes hollow. And it doesn't even rev me up as much if it's the discord part, or it doesn't even satisfy me if it's the joy part. At some point, I have to reconcile those differences and move beyond it. And then I can experience it again, but at another level with a greater understanding and more love and compassion for all sides of the whole thing.
Yep. I was having a conversation about this earlier today with another minister, right? And around the media coverage of the coup attempt last week. And she was relating how, talking to a client, they came to her as, "Oh my God, I can't believe I'm so tired. This is ridiculous." And all worked up and all upset. And the minister asked her, "Well, what have you been doing?" "I've been watching the news at like 10 hours of it a day." "Okay, how does that make you feel?" "I'm exhausted. I can barely keep my eyes open." "Okay, is that bringing you joy?" "No, I'm feeling terrible. That." Right. Okay, so turn off the news. Create the environment that gives you a sense of not only joy, but a sense of moving in the direction of a dream. And and the little discord, give it time, folks, right? If they're still, and a lot of times that points to where our prayer work is most needed. The things that create discord, nothing like good old affirmative spiritual mind treatment to get away from that discord, to remind ourselves, wait a minute, there is a power bigger than I am here. I can utilize that power. We can create the world of our dreams and the life we truly desire. We are creating heaven on earth.
And when you were saying that, it made me think about the whole idea of photography, as it started out by taking a piece of acetate paper and exposing it to light, and based on the amount of light and how long you let the light in or not in, that the image that got impressed upon it was different. And so, when we look at these events of the day, look at ourselves as a piece of film paper with some acetate on it, something that's going to show the contrast of what we are looking at by the amount of light or shadow, if you will, that we allow in on the film paper.
Yep.
And voila, we get different results depending on the light. We haven't even talked about angle. We're just talking about light. If we start talking about the angle now, the angle and the light, oh man, now we got a whole nother realm of possibilities and a whole nother realm of visual experiences that we will have. And so I think the idea of the allness of the one, and that all of these different perspectives of the exact same thing have to be reconstituted for us to step above them. If there's any point where we're only looking at part of the spectrum and not the whole spectrum, there will be opportunities for discord and disruptions, and pick something that leaves something out, and we can use that to make the point.
Yes. Wow. Okay, folks. So we want to hear from you. Remember, this is not just about us pontificating and sharing what we know. We want this to be real for you. Where are you running into? Where do you still run into a little bit of discord in your life? Where do you? And conversely, right, where do you see heaven? Where can you see it? Where in your life strive for that place to identify, hey, this is where things are working. This is the place where I feel like I'm moving forward. I'm being called. I'm being productive. I'm being a beneficial presence on the planet. Because we want to identify the discords, but we also want to be totally conscious of where things are working, because we can figure out how to heal the discords from what's already worked. Years and years ago, when I first got into this whole thing, a wise teacher said to me, you know, by the laws of the universe, if you put one thing in order in your life, if you put one aspect of your life in order, by the law of the universe, everything else has to start to line up behind that. And given time and attention, every aspect of your life will line up in order. And then he would ask, what if you made your spiritual practice that one thing? You don't have to, if there's things that are in disarray in your life, relationships, finances, healthcare, whatever it is, education, get your kids to school. If things are out of alignment, we don't have to put everything in alignment, and we don't have to start with the biggest things. What if you start with your spiritual practice? What if you put just one aspect of your life in order and then allow the rest to line up behind that?
Yeah. And you bring to mind, I forget the title of the book. I'll have to find it, but it's a book by Thomas Troward. The first line in that book says, order is the first law of heaven.
Yeah.
Because when we look at, there's this mathematical precision to the earth, to the universe, that creates an order, or that exhibits or displays that order.
Yeah.
And so we understand from just that observation that is the first law of heaven. That keeps the planets in motion. That keeps gravity working and aerodynamics working. And there is no discord between gravity and aerodynamics. As long as those two things are held within the law of the order of what it takes to fly and what gravity takes to hold you down, there's perfect balance. It's only when that begins not to be in the perfect order that one has an effect on the other.
Right. Order is the first law of the universe. Yes. I can't remember which book it's in, and I had let that quote slip from my mind. So thank you, Z, for reminding me of that one. It's Thomas Troward. Order is the first law of the universe. Wow. Yeah, I think we found that spot. that sweet spot where there's nothing left to be said, right, folks?
Yes.
It's the intention here, and we want to invite you to keep coming back. Please invite your friends, join us on Tuesdays at 2, or catch this at a later time in the rebroadcast. But we really, all of these statements, right, they were written by Ernest Holmes, and they were written decades ago. And now we're being asked to say, okay, is this still applicable? Number one, does this still matter? Does this still inspire? Does this stuff? Now, I know for me, it does. Every time I read this, I am inspired. I am reminded. I don't find any one of these statements to be so outdated that it's just not true. Or no, this was a universal divine download that has endured for decades and decades, and we're going to keep exploring it week after week after week. So next week, what we're going to look at is we believe in the unity of all life and that the highest God and the innermost God is one God. We believe that God is personal to all who feel this indwelling presence. And we believe in the direct revelation of truth through the intuitive and spiritual nature of the individual, and that any person may become a revealer of truth who lives in close contact with the indwelling God. I love that third statement for next week. I'm already like, ooh, 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 ooh,
Yeah, that's going to be a class.
So in the meantime, folks, we want to thank you for being a part of what we're doing here on the New Thought Media Network. This program is produced and directed by the New Thought Media Network. We want to thank you for your cash donations, your tithe donations, your PayPal donations, your Stripe donations. I can say unlike others in our country, we are accepted on all financial platforms at this point. Sorry, little dig there. I couldn't resist. But thank you for being with us, and keep tuning back in. Keep coming back in. And bring your friends with us. We're going to keep looking at the grounding principles of the science of mind and how we can use them in our everyday lives. I'm Rev BRZ.
I'm Rev Z.
We want to wish you all peace and blessings and a great week.
Peace.